Nobody at Nellis Air Force Base had heard the call sign Black Viper in over 40 years, and the last men who did were told never to speak about it again. The Nevada desert was cold that night, the kind of cold that slipped through gloves and settled into bone beneath the roar of jet engines. Heat shimmer rolled across the runway under pale floodlights while two F-22 Raptors taxied into position like steel predators waking from hibernation. Their twin engines growled against the empty darkness, sending waves of exhaust across the concrete. Inside the lead cockpit, Lieutenant Ryan Cole adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the glowing green data crawling across his helmet visor. 29 years old. Top of his class. Fast reflexes. Faster ego. He tapped the comm switch once. Viper lead ready. Static crackled softly in his headset as the control tower cleared the formation for departure. Above the runway, the desert sky stretched black and endless, without a moon. Just stars and silence. Then the radios changed. A low burst of interference hissed through every aircraft frequency at once. Sharp. Sudden. Wrong. Ryan frowned. Control, you getting that? No answer came back immediately. Only static. Then a voice cut through the channel. Calm. Older. Gravel pressed through decades of smoke and desert wind. Viper lead. Check your fuel imbalance. Every pilot froze. Ryan's brows tightened beneath his visor. Who the hell is this? His instruments blinked. Fuel pressure left side. Dropping. Slowly but unmistakably. The warning light flashed amber beside his knee. Ryan's pulse kicked hard once. Control, I've got a fuel feed issue. Tower operators suddenly filled the channel with overlapping chatter. Ground crews looked up from the runway. Inside the AWACS orbiting 30,000 feet overhead, one radar controller stopped typing completely. Because he recognized the voice. Ryan switched frequencies aggressively. Identify yourself. Silence answered him for 3 long seconds. Then the same voice returned, quieter this time. Crosswinds pushing harder tonight than your computer thinks. Ryan glanced outside instinctively. The desert flags near the runway snapped. Sideways under a gust he hadn't noticed before. His aircraft drifted slightly during taxi alignment. Tiny movement, but enough. Enough to matter at 600 miles per hour. Ryan swallowed irritation and corrected the angle manually. Whoever you are, stay off military channels. No response. Only static again. Then the transmission returned one final time. Black Viper out. Dead silence flooded the frequency afterward. Not ordinary silence. The kind that makes trained men stop breathing for half a second. In the tower, Senior Master Sergeant Daniel Reeves slowly removed his headset. The color had drained from his face. One of the younger technicians laughed nervously. What kind of boomer prank was that? Reeves never answered. His eyes remained fixed on the dark runway beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, beyond Hangar 12 and the chain-link fences swallowed by drifting sand, an old man stood alone beneath the desert wind listening to the sound of F-22 engines echo through the night. And for the first time in decades, the ghosts of a classified program had spoken again. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee, machine oil, and cold desert air drifting in every time the blast doors opened. A digital map of southern Nevada glowed across the wall while pilots from the night exercise sat around the long steel table replaying telemetry footage frame by frame. Lieutenant Ryan Cole leaned back in his chair with his flight suit half unzipped, jaw tight, with irritation more than concern. The fuel imbalance warning had disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared, but nobody could explain how an unidentified voice predicted it before the aircraft systems did. A young intelligence officer tapped through radio logs nervously. We traced the transmission for 6 seconds before losing it. Ryan smirked faintly. So somebody with antique equipment got lucky. No one laughed. Senior Master Sergeant Daniel Reeves stood near the rear wall with his arms folded across his chest. He had spent 32 years around fighters, bombers, and classified programs most pilots had never heard about, but his eyes looked older tonight. Much older. The room lights dimmed as the radar replay restarted. Green lines swept across the screen. Audio crackled through overhead speakers. Viper lead, check your fuel imbalance. Every face in the room shifted toward Reeves without meaning to. He stared at the floor. One of the younger pilots finally asked, "You know that voice, do not you?" Reeves took several seconds before answering. No, he lied quietly. Outside, The desert wind pushed dust across the tarmac in thin silver ribbons beneath the floodlights. Maintenance crews moved between aircraft wrapped in reflective vests while the deep metallic ticking of cooling engines echoed across the base. Near the outer perimeter fence, beyond the main hangars, an old man stood beside a faded pickup truck coated in desert sand. He wore a dark brown jacket despite the cold and held a small handheld radio in one weathered hand. His gray hair moved slightly in the wind as another pair of F-22s screamed overhead on landing approach. The old man tilted his head toward the sound. "Too fast," he muttered to himself. "Still coming in too fast." A security patrol vehicle rolled toward him across the service road. Its headlights cut through the darkness before stopping several yards away. Two Air Force security officers stepped out immediately, one young, one older. "Sir, this area is restricted after 2100 hours. The old man nodded once without looking at them. "You boys are rotating your patrol every 40 minutes instead of 30 tonight." The younger guard frowned. "How would you know that?" The old man finally turned. Pale eyes, calm expression, not afraid. "Because your east perimeter stays uncovered for exactly 4 minutes during overlap." The older security officer stiffened slightly. That detail was accurate. Nobody outside base personnel should have known it. The younger guard motioned toward the truck. "We need identification." The old man reached slowly into his jacket pocket. For 1 second the wind carried the distant howl of another fighter engine over the fence line. He paused mid-motion and listened carefully. Then he looked toward the runway lights glowing across the desert. "That pilot is compensating too late on descent," he said quietly. "Crosswind is stronger above 400 feet tonight." Seconds later, one of the incoming F-22s corrected hard during final approach. The younger guard stared toward the runway in confusion. The older guard never took his eyes off the man. Because beneath the old jacket collar, barely visible under the floodlight glare, sat the edge of a worn black shoulder patch almost erased by time. The older security officer studied the patch for several long seconds while the desert wind rattled the chain-link fence beside them. Most of the stitching had faded into gray thread after decades of heat and sand, but one shape still remained visible beneath the dust. A black snake curling around the edge of a dagger. The officer felt his stomach tighten immediately. He had seen that insignia once before. Not on a uniform, not in a museum. In an archive cabinet buried 3 floors beneath command operations. The younger guard stepped forward again. "Sir, identification now." The old man reached into his jacket calmly and handed over a Nevada driver's license worn soft at the corners. The flashlight beam swept across the name. Elias Mercer. No military affiliation. No retired rank listed. Nothing unusual except the stillness in his eyes. Behind them, another F-22 thundered overhead on afterburner departure, the sound rolling across the desert floor like distant thunder. Mercer listened for barely 2 seconds before shaking his head faintly. "That engine has a compressor vibration starting." The younger guard almost laughed. "You can hear that from here?" Mercer looked toward the dark sky. "You cannot." The older officer remained silent. Because deep beneath the engine roar, he thought he heard it too. Barely noticeable. A faint, uneven whine during acceleration. The kind of detail only mechanics or pilots obsessed over for years could catch. Back inside the operations building, tension spread quietly through the command floor. Computer specialists rerouted communication logs while intelligence officers searched every known military database for the call sign Black Viper. Nothing accessible appeared on the public system. Every search returned restricted access. Warnings. Lieutenant Ryan Cole stood beside the giant digital map with his helmet tucked under one arm. "It is just some retired pilot trying to sound mysterious." Reeves looked up sharply from a terminal. "No retired pilot gets into encrypted training frequencies." Ryan folded his arms. "Then maybe somebody hacked the channel." Reeves did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened an old maintenance archive buried beneath layers of outdated files. Most records dated back decades. Test squadrons. Experimental aircraft. Programs long canceled. Then he froze. One scanned photograph appeared on the monitor. Grainy black and white. Desert runway. For pilots standing beside an angular aircraft nobody officially acknowledged had ever flown. 3 faces were labeled. One had been blacked out completely with thick marker ink. Beneath the image sat a faded stamp. Viper program. Classified. Reeves slowly leaned closer to the screen. In the corner of the photograph, partially hidden beneath static damage, sat the same patch from the old man's jacket. His breathing slowed. One of the intelligence analysts approached behind him. "What is that?" Reeves minimized the image instantly. "Nothing." But his voice had changed. "Lower now." Uneasy. Across the base, the security patrol escorted Mercer toward the administration checkpoint near Hangar 12. Floodlights painted long shadows across the concrete, while distant turbines hummed through the night air. Young mechanics stopped working as the old man passed. Some glanced at him only briefly before returning to their tools. Others stared longer without understanding why. Mercer walked slowly but with the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime around aircraft. He never looked lost. Near the checkpoint gate, a fighter mechanic suddenly paused while tightening a panel beneath an F-22 intake. He watched Mercer pass beneath the lights, then narrowed his eyes at the old patch on the jacket. "No way," he whispered under his breath. The mechanic had seen that insignia once before too. Not in person. On the wall of a forgotten maintenance office scheduled for demolition next month. Beneath the faded insignia, someone decades ago had written 4 words in black marker. "If Viper calls, answer." The archive room beneath command operations had no windows, no natural light, and no sound except the low electrical hum from rows of aging servers hidden behind steel cages. Senior Master Sergeant Daniel Reeves sat alone at a terminal surrounded by decades of forgotten Air Force history, while dust drifted through the pale glow of the monitor. The deeper he searched, the stranger the records became. Entire folders existed without dates. Flight logs without aircraft names. Pilot evaluations with signatures removed in black ink. Someone had not deleted the past. They had buried it carefully. Reeves entered another restricted access request and waited while the system processed his credentials. "Access denied" flashed across the screen immediately. Then something unexpected happened. The denial warning vanished on its own. New files unlocked automatically beneath it. Reeves frowned. Nobody bypassed clearance protocols inside this system. Not without command authority. A single folder appeared at the top of the archive. Viper Program Active Personnel. His pulse slowed. Carefully, he opened it. Grainy photographs filled the screen one after another. Experimental aircraft parked beneath desert camouflage nets. Young pilots wearing black shoulder patches. Engineers standing beside stealth prototypes decades ahead of their time. Then one image stopped him cold. A much younger Elias Mercer leaned against the nose of a strange, angular aircraft under the Nevada sun. Aviator sunglasses. Calm expression. One hand tucked casually into his flight jacket pocket. Underneath the photo sat a typed note dated April 17, 1983. Call sign, Black Viper. Flight status, exceptional low altitude instinct response. Reeves stared silently. He had heard rumors about those pilots when he enlisted years later. Ghost stories mechanics passed around midnight hangars. Men who could supposedly feel crosswinds before instruments detected them. Pilots who flew classified routes through canyon corridors without radar support. Nobody believed the stories anymore. Until tonight. Upstairs, Lieutenant Ryan Cole walked through Hangar 12 with his helmet under one arm while crews prepared the next morning's flight schedule. Hydraulic lifts hissed softly beneath the enormous aircraft. Fuel vapors mixed with dry desert air under the ceiling lights. Ryan noticed several mechanics whispering near one of the tool benches before suddenly going quiet when he approached. "What?" he asked. One crew chief hesitated. "You know security brought in an old civilian tonight." Ryan smirked faintly. "The radio ghost?" The mechanic nodded slowly. "He predicted your fuel imbalance before diagnostics caught it." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Lucky guess." But the mechanic did not smile back. "Sir." He also identified compressor vibration in Falcon 2 from half a mile away. Ryan's expression tightened slightly. Falcon 2 had indeed reported a minor vibration issue during post-flight inspection 10 minutes earlier. Not serious, but real. Before Ryan could answer, a young airman jogged into the hangar carrying a thin maintenance binder. "You guys need to see this." He opened the binder carefully on the tool cart beneath the fluorescent lights. Inside sat an old, faded photograph taped to the first page. A black patch, a dagger, a coiled snake. Exactly the same insignia from Mercer's jacket. Beneath it, Handwritten notes covered the yellowed paper in faded blue ink. Most names were unreadable now, except one. Black Viper Training Protocol. Ryan stared down at the binder. What is this? The airman swallowed once before answering. This hangar used to belong to a classified flight division in the 1980s. The mechanic beside him pointed toward the far wall where old paint lines still marked sections hidden behind newer renovations. They say nobody ever flew faster through the Nevada ranges than those pilots. Ryan looked around the massive hangar, suddenly feeling the weight of history pressing beneath the steel rafters. Then the overhead speakers cracked alive without warning. Static flooded the building for 2 seconds. Every mechanic stopped moving instantly. A familiar older voice drifted calmly through the noise. Your right stabilizer actuator is running slow. Silence swallowed the hangar. One mechanic slowly turned toward Falcon 2. Hydraulic fluid dripped steadily beneath the aircraft onto the concrete floor. Nobody inside Hangar 12 moved for nearly 5 full seconds after the voice disappeared from the overhead speakers. The only sound left was the slow metallic drip of hydraulic fluid striking the concrete beneath Falcon 2. Tick, tick, tick. One mechanic walked carefully toward the aircraft with a flashlight, while the others remained frozen beside their tool carts. Lieutenant Ryan Cole stared upward at the speaker system mounted near the rafters. That is impossible, he muttered quietly. The mechanic slid beneath the right stabilizer housing and aimed the light upward into the actuator assembly. A thin stream of fluid shimmered along the edge of a pressure line. His face lost color immediately. He was right. Nobody laughed this time. Ryan felt irritation tighten across his chest again, but beneath it sat something unfamiliar. Unease. Outside the hangar, desert wind swept dust across the runway while distant taxi lights moved slowly through the darkness. Somewhere beyond the floodlit structures, the old man was still on base grounds. Watching. Listening. Inside the underground archive room, Daniel Reeves continued digging through restricted files with increasing urgency. The records became stranger by the minute. Entire flight operations existed without official approval signatures. Mission summaries ended mid-sentence. Coordinates had been removed from navigation logs using black military censorship bars. Then Reeves opened a file marked Night Glass Exercise. The screen flickered once before displaying degraded footage from an onboard cockpit recorder. The video quality was poor, scratched by age and interference, but the desert terrain below remained visible beneath moonlight. A narrow canyon corridor stretched across the screen, while warning alarms pulsed faintly through old analog speakers. The aircraft was flying dangerously low, less than 300 feet above rock formations. Reeves leaned closer. Heavy breathing crackled through the headset recording. Then a younger voice spoke calmly over the alarms. Viper lead entering the corridor. Reeves froze. It was Mercer, decades younger. Controlled. Focused. Radar lock warnings began flashing across the cockpit glass. Another pilot sounded nervous over the radio. Lead, we are losing the route. Mercer answered immediately. Do not follow the instruments. Follow the wind. The footage shook violently as the aircraft banked hard through the canyon darkness. Dust trails spiraled across the desert floor beneath the wings. Then something remarkable happened. One by one, the warning alarms stopped. The aircraft stabilized. 3 additional radar signatures disappeared from the hostile tracking display seconds later. Mercer's voice returned calmly through static. Crosswinds bend differently near heated rock after midnight. Reeves sat motionless staring at the screen. The flight had happened over 40 years ago, yet every word suddenly explained tonight. Mercer was not guessing. He was listening to airflow the same way musicians heard rhythm, feeling pressure changes before instruments confirmed them. Upstairs, Ryan entered the pilot locker room alone, carrying the maintenance binder from Hangar 12. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, while rows of flight lockers reflected against polished concrete floors. He dropped the binder onto a bench and opened the first page again. Black Viper Training Protocol. The handwritten notes underneath looked more like instincts than procedures. Feel the engine before you trust it. Wind has a memory. Computers react. Pilots anticipate. Ryan frowned slightly. The writing sounded old, almost outdated. Yet everything Mercer predicted tonight had been correct. Ryan flipped another page and stopped cold. A photograph slipped loose from the binder and landed face up against the bench. for pilots standing beneath the desert sun beside an experimental aircraft. 3 faces smiling toward the camera. The 4th man stood slightly apart from the group. Calm expression, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Elias Mercer. On the back of the photo, faded handwriting stretched across the yellowed paper. If Black Viper returns, the sky still needs him. The Nevada sunrise arrived slowly across the desert, turning the mountains beyond Nellis Air Force Base into dark silhouettes beneath pale, orange light. Cold air drifted across the runway while ground crews prepared the morning training cycle under rows of floodlights that still had not shut off from the night before. Inside Hangar 12, Lieutenant Ryan Cole stood beside Falcon 2 staring at the open maintenance panel beneath the stabilizer assembly. The hydraulic leak Mercer predicted had already been confirmed by diagnostics. Not estimated. Not guessed. Confirmed. Ryan folded his arms tightly while mechanics replaced the damaged line beneath the aircraft. One of them glanced toward him carefully. "Sir, maybe you should talk to the old man." Ryan shook his head immediately. "I do not need flying advice from somebody who disappeared before I was born." But even he no longer sounded convinced. Across the base, Elias Mercer sat alone near the edge of an empty observation platform overlooking the northern runway. A paper coffee cup rested beside him untouched, while desert wind moved softly through the chain-link fencing nearby. He watched aircraft movements the same way other men watch storms. Calm, focused, listening more than looking. Senior Master Sergeant Daniel Reeves approached slowly, carrying a thick archive folder under one arm. Mercer did not turn around. "You found the canyon footage." Reeves stopped cold. "How did you know that?" Mercer finally looked toward him with faint amusement hidden beneath tired eyes. "Because if they still kept the records, somebody eventually digs too deep." Reeves sat beside him heavily. "That mission should have killed your whole squadron." Mercer looked back toward the runway. "Almost did." Silence settled between them while a pair of F-22s rolled into takeoff position far below. Their engines whined sharply against the morning air. Reeves opened the archive folder carefully. Inside sat dozens of photographs, mission logs, and heavily censored reports stamped classified across the top. "Why did they erase you?" Mercer said nothing for several seconds. Then quietly, "Because some programs survive better as rumors." Before Reeves could respond, Ryan approached from across the observation deck, still wearing his flight suit from morning briefing. His expression remained skeptical, but curiosity had finally replaced arrogance. He stopped several feet away from Mercer. "You really flew those missions?" Mercer studied him calmly. "Does it matter?" Ryan frowned. "You predicted failures nobody else caught." Mercer shrugged faintly. "Machines speak." Ryan almost laughed. "Jets do not speak." Mercer looked toward the runway again, where the F-22s prepared for departure beneath rising heat shimmer. "Yes, they do. Most pilots are just too busy trusting screens to listen." The younger pilot crossed his arms defensively. "Modern aircraft are not flown by instinct anymore." Mercer nodded once. "That is the problem." A deep silence followed. Wind rattled loose metal somewhere beneath the platform. Then Mercer pointed toward the runway without warning. "Your wingman is nervous today." Ryan blinked. "What?" "Second aircraft. Slight overcorrection on taxi steering. He is gripping too hard already." Ryan looked down toward the runway. From this distance, the pilots were invisible beneath tinted canopies. "You cannot possibly know that." Mercer remained calm. "Watch the takeoff." Seconds later, the 2 fighters accelerated down the runway with twin afterburners glowing bright against the morning haze. The lead aircraft lifted cleanly. The second rotated slightly late before correcting hard during climb. Small mistake. Barely visible, but real. Ryan stared upward silently as the jets vanished into the Nevada sky. Mercer slowly stood from the bench, joints stiff with age but posture steady as stone. "Computers react after mistakes happen," he said quietly. "Pilots survive because they feel the mistake before it arrives." Ryan turned toward him again, but this time he no longer saw a strange old civilian standing near the runway. He saw someone the Air Force itself had buried beneath 40 years of silence. By late afternoon, the entire base felt different, though nobody officially admitted it. Conversation stopped when Elias Mercer walked past. Mechanics lowered their voices around Hangar 12. Even the air traffic controllers inside the tower had begun replaying the mysterious radio transmission between routine operations, studying every crackle of static as if the sound itself carried answers. Lieutenant Ryan Cole noticed it everywhere. Men who had mocked the story 12 hours earlier now watched the old man carefully whenever he appeared near the runway. Respect had arrived quietly. That unsettled Ryan more than the voice ever had. He found Mercer standing alone beside an unused simulator bay near sunset. The old building sat partially abandoned at the edge of the training sector, surrounded by faded warning signs and cracked concrete baked by decades of Nevada heat. Inside, rows of outdated flight simulators rested beneath dim yellow lights, like forgotten museum relics. Mercer stood beside one machine with his hands in his jacket pockets listening to the low electrical hum from the equipment. Ryan stepped inside cautiously. "You used to train here?" Mercer nodded once. Before they buried the program, Ryan glanced around the room. Dust coated most surfaces except one simulator cockpit near the center. Someone had cleaned it recently. "You still come here?" Mercer ignored the question. Instead, he looked toward the inactive cockpit shell and asked quietly, "You trust your aircraft?" Ryan answered immediately, "Of course." Mercer's expression remained unreadable. "Too much." Ryan exhaled slowly. "You keep talking like modern pilots forgot how to fly." Mercer finally turned toward him. "No, I think modern pilots forgot how to listen." Before Ryan could respond, Mercer reached forward and powered on the old simulator manually. Ancient monitors flickered alive with static before stabilizing into a grainy desert terrain display. Ryan stared at the controls. "This thing belongs in a scrapyard." Mercer sat down slowly inside the cockpit frame. "Maybe, but it still teaches the same sky." Hydraulic systems groaned softly as the simulator powered fully online. The desert canyon map appeared across the front display. Sharp rock walls, narrow corridors, low altitude routing. Ryan frowned immediately. "That route is insane." Mercer adjusted nothing. No instruments. No calibration. He simply watched the terrain loading across the screen. "We flew it at night." Ryan shook his head. No aircraft from the 1980s could survive that. Mercer looked at him calmly. Most did not. Silence filled the room. The simulator wind audio hissed softly through old speakers while canyon shadows stretched across the display screen. Ryan folded his arms. "So what is this? Another lesson about instinct?" Mercer rested one hand lightly against the cockpit frame. "Sit down." Ryan hesitated, then stepped into the second simulator station beside him. The system connected automatically with a burst of static. Terrain maps aligned across both displays. Mercer never touched the controls. "Run the route," he said quietly. Ryan smirked faintly. "With this outdated garbage?" "Run it." Ryan shrugged and pushed the throttle simulation forward. The canyon visuals rushed toward him instantly. Warning alarms began pulsing within seconds as the narrow terrain closed around the virtual aircraft. Ryan adjusted altitude aggressively. "Too sharp," Mercer said calmly. Ryan ignored him. More warning tones filled the cockpit. "You are chasing the instruments," Mercer continued. "Because that is what they are for." Mercer slowly shook his head. "No. Instruments tell you what already happened." Ryan gripped the controls tighter as turbulence effects rattled the simulator. Then Mercer closed his eyes completely. Crosswind coming from the west wall now. 2 seconds later, the simulator aircraft jolted sideways exactly as predicted. Ryan's eyes widened briefly. Mercer still had not opened his eyes. "Thermal rise ahead," he said quietly. Another turbulence surge hit. Ryan looked over sharply. "How are you doing that?" Mercer finally opened his eyes and stared forward into the canyon display glowing against the old cockpit glass. "Because the desert never changed," he said softly. "Only the machines did." The desert turned gold beneath the setting sun while long shadows stretched across Nellis Air Force Base like dark scars across concrete. By evening, word about Elias Mercer had spread far beyond Hangar 12. Pilots whispered his call sign inside briefing rooms. Mechanics searched forgotten records during breaks. Even officers who normally ignored rumors had begun making quiet phone calls behind closed doors. Yet Mercer himself remained calm, almost detached from the tension surrounding him. He spent most of the evening standing near the runway overlook, watching aircraft climb into the western sky one after another. Lieutenant Ryan Cole found him there again just after sunset. The younger pilot no longer carried the sharp arrogance he had worn the day before. Too many things had become impossible to explain away. Ryan stopped beside the old man and looked toward the horizon glowing orange behind distant mountains. Why did you disappear? Mercer remained silent for a long moment. Wind tugged softly at the faded black patch on his jacket. Finally he answered, because somebody had to. Ryan frowned slightly. That does not explain anything. Mercer looked down toward the runway where crews prepared another pair of fighters for night operations. In 1983, we flew missions that officially never happened. Ryan listened carefully without interrupting. The aircraft were experimental. The routes were worse. Canyon corridors. Low-altitude blackout flights. No support if something failed. The old man's eyes never left the runway lights below. One night we lost a pilot during a classified operation near the border ranges. His voice remained calm, but something heavier moved beneath the words now. The mission should have been canceled after that. It was not. Ryan studied him quietly. So what happened? Mercer exhaled slowly. I broke formation. Silence settled between them while jet engines echoed across the desert floor. I diverted the squadron through a route command considered impossible at night. Ryan stared at him. Without authorization? Mercer nodded once. But everybody came home. Ryan frowned. Then why erase you? Mercer finally looked toward him directly. Because officially, that mission never existed. Which meant the route never existed. Which meant nobody could admit a pilot disobeyed orders and still save the operation. Ryan absorbed the words slowly. So they blamed you. Mercer gave the faintest shrug. No, I volunteered. Ryan blinked. Why would you do that? The old man looked back toward the runway. Because pilots were going to lose careers. Families were going to lose pensions. Somebody had to carry the weight. Wind rattled the fencing beside them again. Ryan felt something shift quietly inside his chest. Until now, he had viewed military legends as stories built from ego and exaggeration. But Mercer carried none of that. No bitterness. No need for recognition. Only silence. Behind them, tires crunched suddenly across gravel. Both men turned as a dark convoy entered the restricted runway access road below. Black government SUVs moved slowly toward command operations while military police vehicles blocked intersections ahead of them. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Who was that? Mercer watched the convoy without expression. Somebody who remembers. The vehicles stopped near the operations building beneath flashing security lights. Air Force personnel immediately straightened posture across the entire flight line. Conversation stopped. Maintenance crews stepped aside instinctively. A helicopter thundered overhead moments later before descending toward the executive landing pad near the tower. Rotor wash blasted dust across the tarmac beneath the fading evening light. Ryan recognized the insignia on the aircraft instantly. Air Combat Command. High-level command presence. Very high. Mercer quietly picked up his untouched coffee cup from the railing beside him. I should probably leave before this becomes a spectacle. Ryan looked back toward the arriving convoy. Senior officers were already moving quickly toward the landing zone below. Then Ryan heard something he had never heard before from an entire Air Force base at once. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Respectful. And somewhere beneath the roar of helicopter blades and desert wind, old veterans working the edges of the runway had begun standing a little straighter. Night settled over Nevada one final time as cold desert wind rolled across the runway lights at Nellis Air Force Base. The helicopter blades had long gone quiet, but the atmosphere across the installation still carried the weight of what had happened. Airmen moved slower. Conversations stayed lower. Somewhere inside command operations, senior officers were reviewing files that officially should not have existed anymore. Yet outside, near the edge of the northern runway, Elias Mercer stood alone beside the same old pickup truck he had arrived in. The faded black patch on his jacket moved gently in the wind, while distant fighter engines echoed across the dark sky above him. Lieutenant Ryan Cole approached quietly carrying something under his arm. A flight helmet. He stopped beside Mercer without speaking for several seconds. The younger pilot looked older now somehow. Less sharp around the edges. Less certain of himself. Finally, Ryan held out the helmet. Attached beside his squadron insignia sat a small black patch carefully stitched onto the side. A coiled snake around a dagger. Mercer glanced at it, but said nothing. Ryan looked toward the runway lights glowing against the desert darkness. I used to think flying was about trusting systems, he admitted quietly. Now I think maybe systems only matter because somebody like you learned the sky first. Mercer's expression softened slightly beneath the weathered lines on his face. The sky humbles everybody eventually, he said. The smart pilots just learn faster. In the distance, another pair of F-22s taxied slowly into launch position for a late-night exercise. Their navigation lights blinked red against the darkness while heat shimmer rolled behind the engines. Ryan watched them carefully this time. Not just the instruments, the wind direction, the sound of the turbines, the slight vibration in the concrete beneath his boots. Mercer noticed. He nodded once very faintly. Then headlights approached behind them. A black sedan stopped near the runway fence, and a tall officer stepped out beneath the floodlights. General Nathan Holloway, Air Combat Command. The same man whose arrival had silenced an entire base hours earlier. Ryan instinctively straightened posture, but Mercer remained still beside the truck. The general walked forward slowly until he stood directly in front of the old pilot. For a moment, neither man spoke. Wind drifted across the empty tarmac between them. Then, without warning, General Holloway raised his hand in a formal salute. Sharp, precise, absolute respect. Ryan felt his chest tighten. Because Mercer returned the salute slowly, almost reluctantly, like a man opening a door to a life he buried decades ago. No cameras recorded the moment. No ceremony existed around it. Just silence beneath runway lights and desert wind. Holloway lowered his hand first. We should have brought you back years ago, he said quietly. Mercer shook his head once. No, the young ones needed to find their own sky. The general looked toward the fighters waiting on the runway. They still need you. Mercer glanced at Ryan briefly before looking back toward the horizon. No, he answered softly. They just needed reminding. The radio on Ryan's flight vest crackled suddenly, with routine tower chatter preparing the nighttime launch sequence. Mercer listened for a moment, then smiled faintly beneath the cold desert air. Crosswind is shifting east tonight, he said quietly. Tell your pilots not to force the climb. Ryan reached immediately for the radio, then stopped himself. He looked at Mercer instead. How do you always know? The old pilot opened the truck door slowly. Because the desert talks, he answered. And for 40 years, nobody was listening. The truck engine started with a rough, low rumble before the headlights turned toward the open desert road beyond the base perimeter. Ryan stood motionless beside the fence while the vehicle disappeared gradually into darkness beneath the Nevada stars. Above him, the F-22s accelerated down the runway one after another, climbing into the night sky with steady, controlled precision. And for the first time since earning his wings, Lieutenant Ryan Cole listened to the sound of the wind before he listened to the machine.